Toxic Rain is still a good league starter. Alright, that's the video. See you next time. No, okay, just kidding. But still great league starter, of course. But there's more to talk about with Toxic Rain these days. Is there's multiple ascendancies, different archetypes, and different ways to set up your gems to deal damage using skill now. So we're at the point where Toxic Rain has become its two really separate archetypes of Self-Cast and Ballista. While Ballista still sees more play, I think Self-Cast doesn't get enough credit for being an also equally good skill, and doesn't rely on any uniques, whereas the Ballista version kind of relies on Wilma's Requital, but still quite good without it. And yeah, basically you're going to play the entire campaign is probably Self-Cast, just because you can. You can actually play the game with both Self-Cast and Ballista setup, which I ended up doing in this build as well. We'll talk about that and how that feels. So in this SSF test, I also used the Pathfinder Ascendancy, just because it's kind of the most popular version of Toxic Rain in the past few leagues, especially with easy access to put Wither down enemies. But I'm not super sold this is still the best Ascendancy, especially with the changes to Elemental Flasks coming into 3.24. It's going to lose a lot of its defensive layers that made it so good in the first place. Lastly, we'll be discussing the manaforged setups with Toxic Rain, Withering, the new Transfigured gem, and how that changes some things. You're able to apply Withering more easily. I think that opens up some possibilities for other classes to Toxic Rain more efficiently. And then Manaforge is still one of, I think, most powerful items and one of the skills in the game, and using it effectively in any bow build is a way to make your build stronger. So talking about how I set up a Manaforge in the setup, and how I even talked about trying a double Manaforge setup, and how that affects our gems and stuff like that. Anyways, let's jump into the video and talk about all those things going forward. If you like this kind of content, make sure to click like and subscribe down below. This will be the last one I do before patch notes, and then we'll have actual builds being put together, not just test runs of SSF. And make sure to check out the Twitch stream down below. I'll have that link. So with that, let's jump into the actual thoughts on this archetype. Alright, so here we are with the Toxic Rain Pathfinder that I played in SSF. I transitioned to Trade League just to start another SSF character in a fresh start scenario. That's why it's sitting in Trade League, but it never actually saw any trades or anything going on. This is all pretty horrible SSF gear. That being said, I want to first talk about the leveling of Toxic Rain. I played this entire character as a self-casting Toxic Rain before switching over to Ballista. Now that we're in maps as a Ballista totem setup, felt really super comfortable as a self-casting. We actually did self-cast, and then we did Toxic Rain Ballista secondary. So self-casting pretty much entire time until we got to like bosses, and we would do Ballista, and that felt super smooth. If you're going to level it up, I might recommend doing both while you can, while you have that option. That was super easy. Toxic Rain, you can get level 12, so you can play it literally from Act 1 until the rest of the game. Just one of those league starters that you can play for the entire game. So that's one of my favorite things about Toxic Rain. First thing I want to do is actually talk about two different archetypes. So first of all, I really wanted to play this as a strictly self-cast and kind of abuse Manaforged as much as possible. So I was thinking about doing two Manaforged setups with a self-cast Toxic Rain. Felt really good until you get to like maps and you actually set up those two Manaforged setups. You just don't have the mana for it. Toxic Rain actually uses quite a bit of mana, especially if you're doing the Totem Ballista setup. But even the self-cast without any sort of, you can't really leech with damage over time. You're only getting the on-hit leech. It just ends up being a little weird, and you kind of clunky with the mana you need. And then I switched to the Ballista setup, but I still wanted to use Manaforged because there's a lot of things that actually help with the Manaforged setup when you talk about Toxic Rain. I'll go over my Manaforged setup that I use. There's a 4-link that I think is just like superb for Toxic Rain. Should be played on Ballista or self-cast setup. And that is Manaforged, Life Tap, Ensnaring, Aerial Frenzy. Frenzy charges give you that attack speed, get your Toxic Rains to overlap. So if you've never played Toxic Rain before, basically I will do a few self-casts here. Puts pods on the ground, they overlap, they explode, and then they actually reach out, and they explode, they're done. But when they reach these pods, you want them to overlap, they'll apply damage over time to the area. They'll actually shoot out little vines attached to the enemy, and those are what's applying the damage over time. But if you get a bunch of them overlapping, that's each one of those dealing damage over time to the enemy. So that's why attack speed, skill effect duration, and your chaos dot multi are the three things that really scale this build to oblivion. Basically, you can pretty much dot cap with this build. That's how Toxic Rain works. That's the self-cast version. The Ballista totem setup is the same. You put on your totems, it'll do the same thing. The best thing about this is now you have 4, 5, eventually 6 totems firing at the enemy at once, so then they all overlap, do the same amount of damage. It's really nice, and that's why the totem setup for Toxic Rain is really powerful. That said, I really wanted to do self-cast just because self-cast feels more comfortable to me. When you're already dealing with a dot build, putting on a totem, and waiting for it to fire, then waiting for it to do dot damage, feels like a long time. Self-cast felt a little bit quicker to me, and that's definitely true. Biggest thing I'll say about the downside of ballista totem setup is that basically your playstyle is totem, 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 hope everything behind you died before your totem expires, and you start the chain again, right? As you can see, I'm out of mana already because ballista totem also reserves quite a bit of mana as a 120% cost multiplier, but you also have other things connected to this. So there you go. That's our totem setup. In this build, I actually ended up using both a self-cast and a totem setup. So the self-cast version, I'm actually using Toxic Rain of Withering. This is something I talked about in the intro, where regular Toxic Rain applies a movement slow, and then Toxic Rain Withering, the new Transfigure gem, applies Withering debuff stacks. Wither is super important for any sort of chaos build, and makes enemies take increased chaos damage and stack up to 15 times. Huge for scaling your damage, definitely need it. If we look at the Pathfinder Ascendancy, it's one of the reasons Toxic Rain is played so much. Nature's Reprisal, you just have chance to inflict Wither on hit, and then increase effect of Wither. It's very strong. That being said, the other things on here are that only other things on Pathfinder that can actually affect us are flask related. So we get Master Surgeon for Eternal Life flasks, flask charges, flask effect, all stuff like that. Without the really strong elemental flask in 3.24, and we have the ability to apply Withering Touch, or Withering with Toxic Rain Withering, or Withering Touch, or a combination of the two. I actually think there's other ascendancies that are more popular now, or could be better, or equally as strong. In my opinion, I want to do a second run of this, but as a champion. Champion actually gives us the ability to play as a, I think, more tanky character entering maps. Pathfinder feels a little bit squishy, definitely really inspired me to switch a totem build in Pathfinder because I wanted to be away from the enemies, where the champion can scale, fortify, armor evasion on a self-cast build and still be perfectly in the battle. So, that's what I'm thinking. And then the second thing that I think you can do with Toxic Rain self-cast is you can do one setup where you have your normal Toxic Rain Mirage Archer, this setup, you're just walking around. Then you can do a second manaforged with Toxic Rain of Withering. Toxic Rain Withering also still applies the chaos damage over time. It just doesn't do the movement slow, it does the Wither stack instead. So you can manaforge that one. It's on top of your normal one with your Mirage Archer. And then you can still have a third manaforge setup for this Frenzy Snaring Arrow setup. Snaring Arrow is super nice, keeps the enemy in place, slows their movement speed even more. And Frenzy is super nice because Frenzy charges increase our attack speed and our damage. Very nice as well. So I think there's a possibility for a really good triple manaforge setup, assuming you can do either life tap it or your mana costs down, most likely through using the minus mana cost craft from Syndicate. That being said, I'm definitely going to do a second run with this build as a champion. Just want to see how that feels. I think it's going to transition to maps a lot smoother, especially as a self-cast version. The other last thing I want to talk about between self-cast and ballista, I switched this build midway through, basically at level 70-ish, from self-cast to ballista, and it's a pretty painful transition because you really need these ballista and totem builds down in the champion or duelist starting area. Without these, the build feels super bad, and they're really out of the way if you're doing a self-cast build. And you just, in a league start scenario, you don't have the regrets to be like changing your tree this drastically, so I think you do need to make the decision before you commit either way. Or you need to commit either way before you start going into it. Because resetting this tree is a disaster. You see, I'm level 75 and I'm still not even done with this wheel yet, which is an incredible power buff to the ballista setup. Okay, I think I've talked about enough about Toxic Rain. We are one day from patch notes. I don't assume Toxic Rain will see any nerfs. It could, but it has been a good league starter for a long time. Not really played super high end, but gets you your Void Stones, does all the cool stuff. I think if anything, there'd be a nerf to Ballista Totems, as there's two really good Ballista Totem builds right now of Toxic Rain and Explosive Arrow. That's definitely another reason I'm testing the self-cast setup. Regardless though, we'll figure it all out tomorrow. And I'm going to jump out here, and we're going to go test some more on my stream, so make sure to check that link down below. And remember to click like, subscribe, follow, leave a comment. Let me know what you think of Toxic Rain, self-cast Ballista, where you stand on that, and I'll catch you all next time.